Welcome to the Unspeakable podcast. I'm your host, Megan Daum. My guest is bioethicist and legendary abortion rights activist, Frances Kissling. Frances was here a little over a year ago, shortly after the word got out that the Supreme Court was poised to overturn Roe versus Wade. And it's been almost a year to the day, June 24th, that the court officially released that decision. So I decided to bring Frances back to reflect on what's transpired since then, whether things are better or worse than many people feared, and what the downstream political effects have been. In this conversation, we cover a lot of ground. Frances talks about what kinds of organizational efforts are underway to get women to places where abortion is available. And that means efforts on the parts of medical providers, activists, and even airplane pilots. She explains how American women are actually now traveling to Mexico to get safe and legal abortions, how doctors have become beholden to the lawyers representing their own hospitals, and how the political extremes makes consensus and compromise impossible on this issue. Now, Frances is an amazing person. She is the president of the Center for Health, Ethics, and Social Policy, and she was president of Catholics for Choice from 1982 until 2007. She worked as an abortion provider in New York State in the early 1970s before the passage of Roe, when abortion was only legal in a couple of states. And she talked about that in our last conversation. So if you didn't hear that one, that was the May 8th, 2022 episode. And I strongly suggest you go back and listen to it. Frances just celebrated her 80th birthday, and she stays overtime for paying subscribers here to talk about what it's like to turn 80, how she was once told she would die unless someone donated a kidney to her, and how tons of people offered her their kidneys. And finally, what it's like to grow older without children or a partner. Spoiler, it has its upsides. I could have told you that, but in ways that might actually surprise you, surprise me. I loved that part of the conversation, and I think a lot of people will too. So if you are not yet a paying subscriber, go to megandaum.substack.com and join for just $7 a month. In the meantime, here is the main part of my interview with Frances Kissling. Frances Kissling, welcome back to The Unspeakable.
It's great to be with you again. I so much enjoyed our first chat.
Yeah, you were here last May, shortly after the Dobbs decision. That's the Supreme Court decision that would overturn Roe v. Wade, of course. Shortly after that was leaked to the press. That decision was officially released by the court on June 24th. At the time that we talked last May, a lot of our conversation had to do with what the actual on-the-ground effects of the decision would be. The abortion landscape is very different today than it was in 1973 when Roe was decided. And you talked about Dobbs as being a major setback, no question, but also as an opportunity for reframing. Your message was that the focus needs to be less on state legislative bodies and more on access, getting women to states where services are available. So a year later, how are you feeling about things? What have you been thinking about since we've last talked?
Well, first of all, I think that in fact, the legal activity on abortion has been at the state level has resulted in substantial restriction. And that for example, you now have a situation where abortion is essentially totally unavailable in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And in 17 states. And those states are clustered in and around the South. So that if a woman lives in, there are some others that, it's the opposite. There are only 17 states where abortion is readily available. And is highly protected. So we have seen action against abortion in the majority of states. And there are, swaths of the country, predominantly in the South, where there is no place a woman can go for abortion. And so from the perspective of people who are opposed to abortion and whose goal is that it be completely illegal, they have had substantial success, period. And then, I think we have seen how draconian in those states where abortion is now essentially illegal, how draconian the laws have been. And we begin to see the effect that this has on women's lives. So of course, we know about the 10-year-old girl who was raped in Ohio and ended up and she was 3 days over the 6-week limit. And she ended up going to Indiana and she did get an abortion. And the state attorney general cracked down on the doctor who is now facing some charges from the local OBGYN society. So we know that. Places where the law has changed dramatically against abortion, or even moderately against abortion, not moderately, but say the 6-week states, what we have is we have lawyers making medical decisions. So a woman goes into a hospital suffering from an ectopic pregnancy. The first thing the doctor does is to call the lawyers.
Wow.
And ask the lawyers, can I do this? And the lawyers, whose job it is, this is what lawyers are like. Their job is to protect the hospital and not to worry so much about the woman. And so they say, no, you have to wait until, she actually has an infection, is all of those kinds of restrictions, you can't hear a heartbeat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so women are beginning to see and feel the effects of what illegal abortion really means.
When you say they call the lawyer, you're talking about like the lawyers, the in-house counsel of the hospital. Is that what you mean?
The lawyers who work for the hospitals are making the medical decisions about whether or not that abortion can be performed.
And are doctors banding together to try to fight this? Do you have any sense of like how organized providers are becoming as a result of this?
They're definitely becoming somewhat more activated. And you certainly have the professional associations nationally. For example, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists is very active in this. There have been some cases where doctors have brought suits in the state, when a negative law is passed. So you have some of that going on. Doctors are it is true. It's not. I'm not being hyperbolic, but it is true that doctors are afraid. They're genuinely afraid of what can happen to them, and so I think there have never been quite enough doctors to meet the need for abortion, particularly later in pregnancy. But it becomes even less desirable to perform an abortion. And there are now some cases which we could see on the one hand as positive, but also negatively affecting women. We have doctors who have moved to another state, making abortion then less available in the state where, even where it might be able to be performed, less available. They want to go to states that are more friendly to, and where abortion is legal, so that they're not living under this day-to-day threat of what new law can be passed that will influence them. So it's at the legal level, it is almost as one would have expected, in that those states that are more blue states, more liberal states, abortion, and as I said, there are 17 of them, abortion has remained available. But for the rest of the country, abortion is either now essentially illegal or so tightly constricted that it might as well be legal. And of course, this is something I talked about when we first chatted, which is that we would see a return to pre-Roe legalization in a small number of states. In that case, it was like 6 or 7 states, and women had to travel. And that was what it was like. And it is becoming the same. You also have a lot of, I think, a substantial amount of creativity on the part, or zealousness on the part of states where abortion is now illegal, where every attempt is made to pass laws, some of which may not end up being approved by the Supreme Court, but restrict certain things. So you can't go out of state to get an abortion. If you go out of state to get an abortion, you could be prosecuted when you come back. Anybody who helps you to get an abortion out of state can be tried. So we now have some cases in Texas where people have come forward and said, these women helped my wife get her abortion, and they should now be prosecuted. You have, a few states in which there's care not to charge the woman who has an abortion that would be seen as illegal with murder, but the doctor can be charged with having committed a homicide. So, there's much increased pressure on doctors and much more latitude towards not and much more openness to others preventing women from getting abortion.
Right. So I want to actually pause there for a second, because we do hear that that is going on, or at least people are thinking about this or talking really loudly about this kind of thing. But do we have specific examples of like women crossing state borders to get an abortion and coming back and being like stopped at the state line or something like that? Like, how is this actually playing out?
I'm going to be honest and say I really don't. I really don't know. I do follow. I do follow the news on this pretty vigorously, and I think there has been some care on the part of those opposed to abortion to not go directly after women,
Right.
because that's not popular. I mean, it's popular to go after a doctor.
Right.
Nobody loves the doctor.
But this scenario where people are ratting each other out, this kind of vigilante thing, like, do we have specific examples of that happening?
There's only a few cases where that has happened up to this point. And of course, it would have to be where the law specifically says aiding and abetting a woman in getting an abortion is a crime. And I don't know the number of states that have passed that law. It's unlikely that it will be up, like, who knows, but it's unlikely that those laws will be upheld in the long run.
Yeah.
In the short run, all of these laws go into effect. Any law attempting to limit abortion goes into effect at the state level, and it has to work its way through the courts.
Right, because my impression is that these laws are being passed or these bills are being proposed, et cetera, and it's pretty draconian, it's pretty shocking, and it's also just strikes me as like it's like political theater. People are trying to score points. It's like these are career moves for people on the far political right. Like it's just a big waste of time, and it's yet another unfortunate byproduct of this. But I sometimes wonder, not that it's something we don't have to worry about or be upset about, but like it comes off as crosses very very performative on the part of some of these lawmakers.
I think that there's some truth to that, although I think, again, the goal is to scare doctors
Right.
into not performing abortions. For the most part, that's the goal, and doctors get scared.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's
We have a lot to lose in terms of continuing to perform abortions, referring women out of state for abortion, all of those kinds of things. I think these laws, which you can say, well, how many women did this actually happen to? Is it 10 women who had to wait for to have their ectopic pregnancy removed, or is it 100? But again, as you say, there is an element of this where the effect is minimal on actual women, but the effect on the availability of abortion is severely curtailed.
And what do we know about access? So, we hear a lot about states like Illinois, for example, that it's positioned in such a way it's surrounded by a lot of more conservative states where abortion has been severely restricted. So, Illinois has been building, Planned Parenthood, for instance, has been building clinics on state borders in the southern part of the state. Do you know how access has been increased? Like what's actually taking place? Are clinics like being built as we speak?
Yes, clinics are being built. And in some cases, what you have is a provider, Texas providers. Okay. So, Texas providers, some of them have moved their clinics to friendlier states. That has happened. You also have situations like in New York and I believe also Massachusetts, where the governors have stepped in and found a way to allocate state funds to pay for women who come for abortion from other states. So there have been some proactive efforts, at the official level to increase access. And you also have, for example, I do a lot of work in Mexico, and we have very concerted efforts by groups there, for example, to provide medication abortion to women outside of Mexico. And also, there are women who are going to Mexico to get their abortions.
Yeah, that's remarkable,
Yes,
actually.
it really is. It really is. It's a total mirror thing going on between Mexico and the United States, because the Mexican Supreme Court had a ruling 2 years ago which said no state in Mexico can criminalize abortion. And so, what is going on in Mexico is each of the states is now in the process of removing any criminal penalties, but also deciding how legal abortion will be in that state. How many weeks will there be requirements for reasons, etc., because each state can do what it wants. And there has been fairly rapid progress. It's still less than the majority of states, but there has been rapid progress on the legalization of abortion in Mexico at the same time as the exact opposite thing is happening in the United States.
Wow. And what kind of limits do there tend to be in Mexico? Like, is there a 15-week cutoff? How liberal are the laws down there?
The general goal in those states where abortion is now legal in Mexico, 12 to 16 weeks is common, but also there are exceptions for things like rape, incest, fetal deformity, the health of the woman, etc., so that there are abortions that are being performed much later in pregnancy. I did a workshop in one of the states about 2 months ago, and one of the conversations that the doctors were having was the very large number of very young women who were coming for later abortions and how they were handling those cases.
You mean how they were handling them medically or
Medically, socially, medically, legally, medically, socially, etc. That I was actually quite impressed with. The public health system in Mexico is pretty good, and most of these young women appear in public hospitals, not in private settings. And the public hospitals have have teams that are working on this to figure out whether they can perform the abortion under the law, and also to provide the kind of social services and other psychological and meet the psychological needs of the women. I was impressed with the sensitivity of the doctors and other medical staff on this question. And of course, Mexico does have a significant problem with rape and impregnation of young women, young girls.
is that why they've become so much more liberal on this? What is it about the political climate in Mexico that has created this surprising reversal?
I think that there is a very, very strong women's movement in Mexico, and even though the current AMLO, who is the president of the country, even though he is not favorable to abortion, he's somewhat evangelical in his approach, and but he has, for example, the Secretary of Health and the woman who heads the Agency on Women, they have all been very strong proponents of the process of liberalization.
Hmm.
And the public is not as opposed as we would think. I mean, we make a lot of assumptions about Catholics, for example, and yet the majority of Mexican Catholics, a slim majority, believe that abortion should be legal.
So when women are coming down from the United States to get an abortion in Mexico, where do they tend to be coming from? What are the circumstances that have led them there?
Well, I mean, they are led to go there because they can't get an abortion in the state in which they live. Many of them come from the southern part of the United States, where abortion has been heavily restricted, if not illegal, and they mostly go to private practitioners.
And have they been referred there by, like, their own physicians? Like, what would make somebody decide to go to Mexico as opposed to, like, you know, Kansas or Illinois?
One of the things that happens is, first of all, in Mexico itself, over 50% of abortions are medication abortions. Okay, legal abortions.
And you're okay, just I think everybody knows what this is, but just in case anyone doesn't, we're talking about, like, the pills that you take.
They take pills which bring on, in essence, a miscarriage.
Right.
And that is widely available in Mexico. So, on the grapevine, women, pretty much figure out that they can go over the border. They don't have to go very far into Mexico, and they can buy the pills. So,
Like, just walk into a pharmacy, they don't need a prescription.
pharmacy, and they get the pills. There are also a couple of very good women's groups who are providing pills to women in the United States via the mail. You get on the web, or you find an advertisement that we do medicine by phone or by internet. Women call Mexico, call these places, and those places send them by mail the pills. So there's a knowledge that there are ways to access abortion in Mexico, either by pills by the mail, going over the border and going into a pharmacy in Tijuana or wherever, Monterrey, wherever, or actually getting a surgical abortion.
Okay. How many weeks along do you have to be before the pills are not gonna be sufficient?
Yeah. The general policy or practice is to use the pills till about 10 weeks of pregnancy. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that the pills will work up till 24 weeks. Now, and there are countries, for example, in South Africa, abortion by pill is routinely, then the numbers are not high, but is routinely used into the early 20 weeks of pregnancy. Of course, the protocol is different in the sense that how much medication you need. It's not, it's a
That
difficult
sounds really scary and
procedure.
terrible.
It's a very difficult procedure. And so we have generally here in the States and in Europe, generally they are limited to the first trimester of pregnancy.
Mhm. Okay. So I think I know when we spoke last time, we talked a lot about how this new, the medicalized abortion as opposed to surgical abortion, it had changed the picture quite dramatically. The coat hanger kind of model was, I got the feeling it really wasn't relevant so much because we do have this other option. But I also feel like perhaps people are sort of being a little bit kind of starry-eyed about the medication. I don't really know what the right word is. Like, I think I'm guilty of this too, thinking like, oh well, this has changed so much. It's much easier to get an abortion. It's less of a big deal. All you do is take this medication. But the fact is that I know several women who were given the choice between getting a surgical abortion and taking the medication, and they just said, no, I want this one and done. I want to be sure it worked. And I don't care if I have to pay more money and go under anesthesia and all of this, but I don't want to take my chances. Do you think that we are too sort of optimistic or unrealistic or naive about medicalized abortion?
I think that the attitude towards medicalized abortion has changed dramatically from its early introduction.
And when was it introduced?
Oh, God, it's at least now 20 years that we've had the misoprostol and mifepristone to use for this. And in the beginning, I was very interested in this because in the beginning, we talk about it was mostly available in Europe or the US. And European women overwhelmingly chose medication abortion,
Hmm.
overwhelmingly. And American women initially were like, you're the person who said, look, I want to go into the clinic. I'll have a surgical abortion, 3 hours, it'll all be over, and I'll go home and everything will be fine. We wanted the speed and the reassurance of it's over. Okay.
Right. And not having to trust ourselves with it. I think a lot of it was just like, well, how am I supposed to know that this worked?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that was a predominant, the predominant reason for choosing surgical abortion over medication abortion. And I think that there were social reasons that women here preferred to go to the doctor and have the procedure and have it over with quickly.
Right.
And it had to do with the nature of our healthcare system and our labor system. So, for example, a European woman could go have the pill and or even if she chose otherwise to have a surgical abortion, although this was not their dominant choice, they could take time off from work if they needed 3 days to recuperate. It was part of the health practice. I mean, that the ways in which we deliver health services for women is important. It influences the kind of decision they make.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for European women, again, having it over with was fine. And they were happy to do it. And there were so many doctors who made it available that it was not such a big deal as it is. But I think that, I think that what I see now, okay, is that remember that a large percentage of women who have abortions are young. Okay. It's not the woman, there are women who have 3 children and who say, I don't want a fourth. There are, all sorts of reasons that women have abortions later in their life. But there is a very large percentage of young women who become pregnant and who either are not ready to have children. They may even be married, or they may be unmarried women, college-age women, etc. And their attitude towards medicine is very different than I think those of us who are older. Okay. For them, pills are no big deal. Everybody uses you can use the pill is the easiest thing to do in terms of ending a pregnancy for a younger person.
Wow. Is it because they're just used to taking medication
Yeah.
for lots of things?
Yes. And of course, remember, they have no prior experience of illegal abortion.
Right.
So, they could choose surgical, they could choose, the pill. in some senses, surgical is, in one way, surgical is, you would say, quicker, but after you have a surgical abortion, you still you may want to have a day or two off. I think it's probably easier to keep the pills secret.
Right. What do we know, though, about things like pills being intercepted in the mail? We have heard stories now about like people being prosecuted for mailing pills. Like, why would somebody, is it easier to get the pills mailed from Mexico than, say, Massachusetts?
No, I mean, I think that in that sense, I don't think the majority of women who get pills by mail are getting them from Mexico. I think getting them right here in the United States of America. They may be getting that. They may not even be going. They may be getting them not by mail, but by going to a clinic. A clinic that provides abortion often provides both medical, surgical abortion and medical abortion. And you choose which one makes more sense for your life and for how you feel. So no, I don't, so Mexico is a source, but it is one of many. It is not the primary source of medical abortion for women in the United States.
Okay. So since Roe has been overturned, we've seen a lot of states with ballot initiatives to make abortion access available in the state. We've seen places like Kansas that said,
Mhm.
we're just going to make abortion available here. End of story. Do you see the tide turning in terms of just voters finally saying, okay, you know what, we don't like this. The fact is the majority of people do want abortion access, and we're going to actually take this into our own hands on a state by state level.
I'm very interested in the change among people who are generally opposed to abortion. You know, I know more people who are opposed to abortion than most people who are pro-choice do, for whatever reason. And what I hear over and over again, and what I see in the press is, on the one hand, up to now, I've painted a picture of success by those who are opposed to more success by those who are opposed to abortion in making it illegal than we have had successes in keeping it legal and therefore available. And that's true. There's more legal success by the anti-abortionists right now than there are by those of us who are pro-choice. But I'm seeing a very big shift among what I would call moderate pro-lifers about what Roe has wrought. They say to me, and you can read articles about this is not what I thought pro-life meant. I did not think pro-life meant that a woman who had an ectopic pregnancy would have difficulty having the embryo removed. I did not think that, she would go to a hospital and they would have to check for a heartbeat. I did not think that they would be passing laws that made it a criminal offense for a doctor to perform, and that it's illegal, but the penalties are very high. A doctor can lose his license. I didn't think that this would become as draconian as it has.
They didn't think that, even though they've said that was going to happen. People have been screaming about this for years, and in fact, they were very perfectly clear that those things were going to happen.
Right. But there is always a difference in what is possible and what is happening.
Right.
And in that sense, I mean, people, and also there is a thing where, you say, oh, I'm against abortion. I don't think abortion is a good idea. And if you talk to the person, you find out that they believe in an exception. They call themselves pro-life. They don't think abortion is a good thing, but they think that there are a number of exceptions that are acceptable. Fetal abnormality, the woman's health, rape, those things, they never expected that abortion would be illegal for everything without exception. And so they themselves find the zealousness of the approach in some states, and by attorney generals have a lot to say about this, and by attorney generals, they do not find this attractive. I have had many, we have, a significant number of pro-life legislators who are happy with a 12-week compromise.
Mm-hmm.
You hear people talk about 15 weeks, 16 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is. And those people come from both sides of the aisle.
Right.
Pro-life for the less absolutist person never meant no abortions. It meant that there would be more control and more reasons, maybe reasons would be needed, or lower gestation, that they bought into the, I heard Pence last night, describe Roe as, and the Democratic position on abortion as abortion on the way to the delivery room.
Yeah.
Well, that was never true.
Right.
It was just, but people believed that. So like when you would look at polls, pro-life, pro-choice viewpoints on abortion, you would find towards the more difficult questions agreement by pro-life and pro-choice people. Like, the majority of Americans do not think third trimester abortions should be illegal. And they believe that second trimester abortions should be illegal. And on the other hand, you have many pro-life people who believe a first trimester abortion is not a big deal, even though they think they are pro-life. They don't think teenagers should, be stuck continuing a pregnancy. You would be surprised. There was a poll that was done by Gallup quite some time ago. I wish they would do it again, in which they asked pro-choice and pro-life people all of these very specific questions about should abortion be legal for this, should abortion be illegal for that. And they found substantial crossover between people who call themselves pro-choice and pro-life towards what we might call a very moderate position.
Why is it that, on the pro-choice side, obviously the strategy has been, let's talk about this in terms of abortion on demand, for instance. Let's talk about this in such a way that the public messaging really sounds more extreme than it perhaps needs to be. And then I also want to know, on the other side, on the extreme pro-life side, what these zealots think they're really going to get out of this. So let's start with the first one. Like, why has the pro-choice side been so, I don't know what the word is. I don't want to use the word strident, but there is a kind of glibness to the messaging.
Adamant that abortion is a decision to be made by a woman, period. That it is a right. And I think, I've said this before, but I think that rights arguments did not particularly help us after a certain point in time. And that arguing that this is a near absolute, if not absolute right, makes people queasy. And the same thing is true, but if you have taken a position, and this goes on both sides. If you have taken a position that the fetus is a person from the moment it is conceived, or that a woman has a right to decide whether or not to have an abortion at any stage in pregnancy, then you are stuck. Because whenever the hard question, because how can a true person who believes the fetus is a person from the moment of conception admit that, well, if you've been raped, it's a different story. If the fetus has a severe abnormality that will compromise its life from the beginning. That's not the same as just deciding you are not ready to bear a child. And you can't give on any of those positions, because once you give that position, give on the position, for example, on the pro-life side, that, well, it's not accurate to say that the fetus is a person from the moment of conception, because if I say yes, it's okay for rape, or and of course the response that is given when people say, what about rape? A true dyed in the wool pro-lifer will say, you can't punish the child for the sins of the father.
Yeah.
This doesn't go the average people are not going to buy this. And the same token, when somebody says, well, if a woman decides at 28 weeks, as opposed to say a 24-week cutoff, that her relationship changed and now she doesn't want to continue the pregnancy, that's her right. It's her right. As long as the fetus is inside her, it is her right to decide whether to have an abortion or not. So both sides have been trapped by ideology. On my side of the aisle, which is the pro-choice side, since abortion was legal, the extreme end of position was less acceptable. Okay? Because legally, look, you can get an abortion at 12 weeks. You can get an abortion at 16 weeks. You can even get an abortion at 24 weeks. It's legal. Why are you pushing this on? You sound extreme. But now what has happened is, not that I don't think the pro-choice side needs to, come to some moderate terms on this, but now that it can be illegal, it is the anti-abortionist who looks extreme. Because rape, they can't have an abortion when they were raped. This is ridiculous, kind of thing. So when it's legal, the more extreme pro-choice position is criticized. And when it is illegal or unavailable, the more extreme pro-life position becomes more unpopular.
Right.
And
Exactly.
so this is, you could say, if I was talking pure politics, I would say, well, this draconian law is at the cultural and the popular level, to the advantage of those of us who want to see abortion more legal, because people are not going to accept this level of restriction.
Yeah. So this is like a little pain period that we're in.
They're the ones who look extreme now, and we look less extreme.
You have been the president of Catholics for Choice. I don't know if you're still a practicing Catholic, but that's certainly in your background. I'm imagining that you understand the mindset of extreme pro-life people more than your average abortion rights activist. What is in the minds of the pro-life, let's just call them zealots, like the people who think that under no circumstances should there be any abortion, uh, at any time? What are they thinking? Like, how do they see this playing out? Like, what is their rationale?
Well, for a person who holds I'm going to switch to the term absolute, as opposed to extreme, but for a person who is absolutist on any issue, okay, and the Catholic position as presented by bishops and popes and ordinary priests is absolutist. The fetus must be valued as a person from the moment of conception, must be valued as if it were a person from the moment of conception. They are right now at the activist level, and I would say the Catholic bishops fall in that category, even some evangelicals fall in that category, and some people fall in that category, is they do not see a conflict because the only thing they think about is the fetus. They do not think about the women. And they have, or what they, here are some of the ways in which this gets framed. It's good for the woman not to have an abortion. That it's now better because women, that, there is such misinformation at all levels around this, because women regret having their abortions. So it's good that if they can't get an abortion, number one. There's also a certain apologia that is happening, which I find fascinating, which is that the Catholic bishops and Catholic pro-lifers, as well as other pro-lifers who believe that abortion is always immoral and is always an unjustifiable killing of human life, there's now an attempt to talk more about, now we have to step up to the plate and help women continue their pregnancies.
Right.
This is now the defense, again, on the part of the bishops and on the part of others, for being absolutist on abortion. We are now going to take care of women who have unwanted pregnancies and who might have an abortion. Okay. And, it's a lie. It's really a lie in a sense, because they will still, these groups and these individuals, and in the Catholic Church, they will still vote for a representative who is against all abortions and provides nothing for women with children. Because if you really want to take care of women who might have had an abortion, but would not have but are having that abortion because of economic reasons, for example, which is a high percentage of women, you would not vote for any candidate who isn't for all of the things that make life livable for children and women. And they won't do that because abortion is still number one on the political plate for those people. And, and that goes for, there are small groups of feminists who are opposed to abortion, who are also saying that now, that we are going to see that women are cared for. And of course, we have all these pregnancy centers for women, which supposedly helps them take care of a child and not have an abortion.
This is the crisis pregnancy centers. Whenever it says crisis, that's how you know, right?
I'm sorry, it's not enough to give somebody a crib and to pay for diapers for the first year of the child's life.
Are there they used to call these the Magdalene laundries, right? I don't know where that term came from, but
Ireland.
That's from Ireland? Okay, so that's when the girls were sent away to be pregnant. As soon as they were visibly pregnant, they were sent away. And
they were sent to the laundries for many reasons. They were sent to the laundries, first of all, because they were pregnant, but they were also sent because they were bad girls. Their parents, they were normal teenagers. They went out, they saw boys, they didn't do what their parents told them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could end up in a Magdalene laundry for many, many reasons in addition to being pregnant.
And why was it called laundry? Sorry, I always wondered this.
Called the laundry because they were laundries. You went to these, you were taken to these centers. And what you did while if you were pregnant or if you had just been a bad girl, some of the girls were sent by the courts and some of them were sent by their parents. And they were actually physically laundries. And what you did in that laundry in that place was you did laundry.
Wait, literally like doing the wash?
Yes.
Oh, I always thought maybe it was like they were laundering the experience. I didn't know if okay, wow.
They were doing that too. And
like a commercial laundry. Sorry to like, a commercial laundry, like a okay.
Except that it was a time when doing the laundry meant you had a washboard and lye soap.
But why was this the particular like labor choice for this group?
They had those kinds of places rather than that they had factories.
Like, why weren't they doing sewing or something?
Or that cleaned fish or things like that? I don't know. But everybody needed a laundry, and the sisters had captured the laundry trade, and the nuns who ran these places. And this is what the girls and the women who were sent to those places did. And it was called Magdalene laundries because the ultimate sinner in Catholicism was Mary Magdalene.
Right.
Remember that she was a prostitute. And then she learned to love Jesus and she became a good woman. And so that was the goal. But you got stuck in that laundry for your lifetime.
And the babies were given up for adoption as soon as they were born.
Babies were given up for adoption, and many of those babies died, and they were buried in mass graves.
Why did they die?
They died because they didn't have good care.
You mean they died at birth?
They died at birth.
And this was, what time period are we talking about?
I would say the 30s, 40s, 50s is when that stuff started. I'm not an expert on it, but it started then, and it went for quite a long time.
So the version of that we have now in the United States, like these, the crisis pregnancy center, like are these women then referred to like a place where they can go and be pregnant, like for the period of time and then have the baby and give it up for adoption? Like, does that model exist?
There are still places. First, I don't think for the most part, women who are pregnant, who end up in a crisis pregnancy center, I don't think most of them end up in a home for unwed mothers.
Okay, right.
That model, we had that model in the States, but women don't feel the need to do that. As like obviously, first of all, because if you become pregnant and you don't want your pregnancy known and you do not want to, or you carry that pregnancy to term, you have an abortion. So we're now talking about a smaller population of women who end up continuing what was an unwanted pregnancy, and they go and obviously we know a significant number of women go to these pregnancy counseling centers thinking it's a place where they can get an abortion.
Right.
And some of them are convinced or cajoled into continuing their pregnancy, and some of them want to continue their pregnancy. And there are a percentage of these pregnancy centers that are actually honest. Okay, not all of the pregnancies, there are thousands of them rather. Not all of these centers lie to women. Most of them lie to women, but not all of them. And what happens is that while you are pregnant, first of all, they refer you to Medicaid. They handle you're going to continue the pregnancy. So they don't really give you that much, but they process everything that is necessary for you to get Medicaid so you can continue the pregnancy and then to get on, whatever appropriate public assistance exists for you and your child. They do that. In addition, they provide, as I said, they literally provide things like they provide very modest things themselves, like diapers, formula, a crib, etc. And they also handle adoption.
How common is adoption at this point?
A lot of government money.
Okay. But again, so these, what were we calling them? Not extremists. What were we calling them?
Absolutists. The absolutists.
The absolutists. Okay.
The adamant.
In their minds, are they imagining all these babies being born, some of them with a lot of medical problems, and then being adopted by like nice American parents? Like, what's the fantasy?
Imagine that in some cases, the women will keep their child and be a single mother. And in some cases, the women, and in other cases, in the majority of cases, the children will be given up for adoption. That's what they imagine. The other thing that's very interesting is what they don't imagine, and what most of the adamant, particularly those on the Catholic side, do not imagine, is that after they have their child, they will use birth control.
Mm.
They don't, they are adamant, particularly those centers that are Catholic, and even the feminist groups who are anti-abortion, who are largely motivated by Catholicism. They do, in this process now where they are saying, okay, we succeeded and abortion is not going to be legal anymore. And we now have to do something about women who become pregnant that is compassionate and caring. And that is, we have to do the things that make it economically possible for them to thrive. Maybe even we want to see them go back to school. We want to have all those good things happen, and we're going to work for that. But they don't say, and what we're also going to do is promote family planning.
Yeah.
Which really is the more effective method of reducing abortion than providing a woman who has a kid with some diapers.
Yeah. Yeah. I have so many more questions about this.
That is the absolute unwillingness to recognize contraception as central to, first of all, not becoming pregnant if you don't want to be pregnant, but also not needing an abortion.
Right.
And yet you are adamant on this issue. And I've been following online, particularly some small movements of women who call themselves feminists and who are against abortion and contraception. And their mindset around contraception is immediately to see everything bad about contraception. Okay. That, contraception is, the pill is bad for women. These bad things happen if you take the pill. Or whatever it is, contraception is not, in their minds, it's not in women's interest to use contraception.
Are you talking about hormonal contraception? I mean,
almost all forms of contraception are problematic. The IUD is problematic. The pill is problematic. Sterilization is problematic. Long-acting reversible contraceptives, like shots, are problematic. None of these things are good for women. And some of them, like the long-acting contraceptives, they believe cause abortion.
Oh.
Because they say that, yes, because those are abortifacients, because they believe they act after conception.
Oh, this is like a little mind twister here. I see. Okay.
The IUD, the embryo has already been created, fertilized, and passes, through the utopian tube.
The utopian tube.
Right. That's a good title
think
for
about
something.
that.
Right. Into the womb, and it is rejected because of the presence of the IUD. That's an abortion. And so they find a way to not accept contraception. And of course, the reality in the end is that you are not supposed to be having sex without being willing to become pregnant and carry the pregnancy to term.
Yeah, well, there is a sort of growing conversation around hormonal contraception and just the way that the pill is being prescribed to a lot of young girls, like almost immediately at puberty. Like I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago who's certainly in no way opposed to contraception or even hormonal contraception for a lot of people. But I think people are starting to say, okay, well, the birth control pill, it was never designed to be used for most of a woman's reproductive life. And now it is, we are now assuming there is a baseline assumption that a woman is going to be infertile, like, on the dating market, for instance. And so there's a lot of people talking about how this has affected the mating economy. That this is a whole other thing. And I know that's not what you're referring to, but
that goes back to that goes back to when that kind of approach to the pill goes way back. I mean, in the 1960s, there were there was a woman named Barbara Seaman, Seaman, who was very much respected, who wrote the case against the pill. And what you are talking about is what she was saying as well. And then that faded, and I think, and you're saying that now there are some newer studies of this that
yeah, because I think a lot of
no longer be on the pill forever.
yeah, and I think a lot of younger women are just. I think there's a feeling that men have been very spoiled by this new
Yes,
reproductive landscape. But it's taken
yes.
the onus off of men and put it on women, and there's all kinds of downstream effects of this. And I don't think that in no way does that equal. I mean, for most people, that nobody is saying that we should not have contraception, but there's a discussion about some of the unintended consequences.
Like when you go through the list of arguments made by those against abortion to abortion, one of them is abortion lets the man off the hook.
Yeah.
Okay. And I say men are off the hook. Whether you have an abortion or you have a child, we are still at a point in our society where we don't have mechanisms for men to take responsibility for the child they created.
Well, we can go after them for child support.
Well, that's right. We do, and they don't do it, and we leave them alone.
Well, sometimes they do it. They're required to do it. I mean, it would say that you can get your paycheck.
Generally speaking, there are a lot of fathers who are not taking care of their children.
Right, but there are legal mechanisms to take
Yes.
garnish people's wages, and
Yeah.
there's a system
Right.
in place. But yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Anyway.
So I want to make sure before we wrap up this portion that we talk about how you're feeling kind of about the future of things. But before we do that, I actually wanted to talk about a couple of things that I told my listeners, especially the women in the Unspeakeasy community, that I was going to be talking with you. And I asked if they had anything they wanted to make sure we covered. And several people talked about the relationship between the COVID vaccine mandate and just the whole concept of bodily autonomy. And I wonder if you have thoughts about this. So somebody asked what you think about the co-opting of my body, my choice, health sovereignty centric rhetoric, and how that has the effect that that's had on the current landscape of support for abortion rights.
Right. Well, first, I would say that when we think about establishing public policies, particularly any kind of mandate, okay, you must wear a mask, you must get vaccinated, those kinds of things. And of course, the COVID thing also plays over into the anti-vax movement as well. What you have to include in an evaluation of whether or not you are being unjustifiably coercive, it goes to the question of, is coercion ever permissible, is the effect on others. In other words, if you are like polio this goes back to everything of this sort: polio vaccine, smallpox vaccine, all vaccines, COVID vaccine, wearing masks, etc. All of those things fall in this category of, do they have a strong enough negative effect, if not used, on others in the society? So if we're worried that if the health system is worried that large numbers of unvaccinated people or people who will not take the COVID vaccine will cause more people who don't want to get COVID to end up with COVID, then you have a balancing act that needs to take place. If there were no effect of the vaccines, the COVID vaccine, or masking or whatever, on other people, then there would be no ethically justifiable reason for the state to mandate that you get vaccinated. But if there is going to be a strong effect on others who do not wish to receive, who do not wish to get the disease in question, then it is not quite the same as saying my body, my choice. My body, my choice, which relates to pregnancy, okay, for example, or sexuality, primarily affects the individual, does not affect the whole of society. You can extend everything to it affects the whole of society, because then we have to educate your kid and we have to do all these things. And maybe you shouldn't have a child. But primarily, the effect of being pregnant and being able to choose whether or not to continue a pregnancy or end a pregnancy affects you.
Right. Although now what we know about the vaccines is that they do not prevent the spread. So I think people would make the argument that COVID vaccine does really at this point affect the individual more than the population. We didn't know that in the beginning. So
yeah, I just would say I'm not aware of that. I would like, when we finish this conversation, what will happen with me is that I will explore.
I'm sorry. I'm going to ruin your whole day.
Given me another thing that I have to research. So, no, is Megan right? Or the people Megan is dealing with, are they right that I have wasted my time taking 5?
No, you haven't wasted your time at all because you're protecting yourself. Absolutely. No, I've got the vaccine too, but I think what we now know is that it doesn't prevent spread. You can still pass it to other people even if you're vaccinated.
I am protected. I can give it to other people, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I think, yes. I mean, but if you are to get sick, if you're vaccinated, you are going to be much, much more likely to survive.
Yes, if I get sick, then I have to quarantine myself for a little while.
Right, but right. Yeah, this isn't a conversation about vaccines, but yeah.
Before I knew it, I might spread the disease.
Right, but if you're vaccinated, being vaccinated in and of itself does not keep you from spreading COVID to others. I think that is what we now know. Anyway, but I think that, and somebody asked this, and I have noticed this myself. Like I have noticed that that Republican and libertarian types, people who, well, not so much libertarians, but people who were more just sort of pro-life because that aligned with their other political positions in the wake of the pandemic have been forced to kind of look at this, and they say, well, I don't like the idea of being forced to have a vaccine because I don't want the government telling me what to do with my body. Therefore, I'm a little bit of a hypocrite if I think that a woman shouldn't be able to get an abortion, that the government should interfere.
It works good for abortion, but maybe not for something else.
Yeah, but people have really been forced to get their minds around these things. So where do you think we are at this point? Okay, first of all, has this been worse than you imagined a year ago than when we talked? Is it about the same? Has this gone better or worse than you feared?
In general, I think I would say it is between about the same and worse. Okay. In terms of my expectations. I don't think we have yet grappled with some of the worst. Okay, so the next thing is this. I haven't seen much action on this. IVF. You create some embryos. Well, if these embryos are people, what are we going to do? We can't destroy them. Does the woman have to have all of them inserted? I mean, all of those embryos in the minds of the adamant absolutist are the equivalent of people, each and every one of them. Maybe we have to outlaw IVF.
That would change a lot of people's minds. Yeah, that's not going to be popular.
No, it's not going to be popular, but there are people who are going to try it.
But do you think that taking this out of the hands of the court is going to ultimately push us back toward greater access to abortion? That more states are going to go the way of Kansas, that we're going to just have people say, okay, no, enough is enough. Sorry, you called our bluff. This isn't really what we want.
Not in my lifetime.
Okay.
I mean, I think that there will be more, again, right now we have 17 secure states out of 50. All of those remaining 33, I guess, adds up to 50. Those 33 states that are not secure, few of them have completely banned abortion. Some of them have limited abortion. And over time, I think more of those states will go conservative on abortion or against abortion than towards abortion.
Why?
So, because we live in a country of red and blue states. And I don't see most of the states that are socially conservative, culturally conservative, as well as other types of conservatism. But those that are in the cultural conservative bag, I don't see my side winning a lot of those states in the next decade.
But most voters want abortion access.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter.
Really?
No.
It doesn't matter.
No, because if most voters, because that would say, and this is largely true, that in some of those 33 states, I mean, do we really think most Texans are not generally in favor of some access to abortion, or Floridians? Look at those states. And does the state care?
But don't you feel like those voters will vote those people out and eventually over time? No?
I do not. No, I don't think that. I think that is the hope of the pro-choice movement, is that, and there is some evidence in some places where it is said that the exit polls show that people who voted think that abortion should be legal. But that's not the only issue that people are concerned about.
Mm.
And right now, they're more. They may say, "Yeah, I think there are not that many single issue abortion voters who are among those who are in favor of abortion." That each of the two camps consists of people who are interested in a large number of issues. And abortion does not always rise to the top. And in the current climate in the country, it is not, even though people are upset about abortion and think it should be legal, they're more upset about education in the schools. They're more upset about transgender issues. They're more upset about the economy. They're more upset about jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so even though abortion may be an issue in which they say, yes, I think abortion should be legal, but I got to take care of the job problem. I got to get back in control of the schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that those other issues on abortion will determine how people vote more than abortion.
So that's so interesting. It's like the left is overplaying its hand in some ways, and
yes, in some ways,
control of this
to
issue.
our advantage, because again, the majority of Americans who say they believe abortion should be legal do not believe abortion should be legal to the extent it was legal under Roe. And therefore, they now get to look at what a law on abortion looks like that goes to the state legislature. And if it's not very moderate, It can't rise up very high. I mean, this has always been the problem with polling, is that those of us who are pro-choice believe the top line. Do you believe abortion should be legal? Yes. Do you support Roe v. Wade? Yes. They don't know what Roe v. Wade is or was. And when they say they think abortion should be legal, they are not thinking of a Roe formula, because then you go down to the second line. That's the top line of the poll. And you go down to the second line. Do you believe abortion should be legal in the first trimester? Do you believe abortion should be legal in the second trimester? Do you believe abortion should be legal in the third trimester? Do you believe parents should have a say, should have to consent or know that their child is having an abortion? All of those other issues. Do you believe abortion should be legal for economic reasons? Oh, I believe it should be legal for rape, and I think it should be legal for health. But I don't know if it should be legal just because somebody doesn't have enough money. That's why the side that is strongly pro-choice prefers rights-based decisions on abortion that come out of the court, not the legislature. Traditionally, the courts were more reliable for liberals. Now the courts are not so reliable for liberals.
Right.
I mean, you look at the 9 people on the Supreme Court. You've got 5 of them, maybe 6, I can never remember, who either are practicing Catholics, or Gorsuch, who was raised as a Catholic, but probably is not a Catholic.
Okay. So what if somebody wants to be an abortion rights activist, if they want to try to do something, feel like they're doing something, what's the best thing they can do?
They should support an organization called the Brigid Alliance. The Brigid Alliance is, in my opinion, the most effective fund for women who need abortions and can't afford it. It doesn't pay for the abortion. It pays for the bus, it pays for the train, it pays for the plane, it pays for the hotel, it pays for the babysitter. Because just now, so that's that I'm still in the same place I was when I last talked to you. The most important thing we can do is pay for abortions for women who want them and cannot get them.
Okay. How do you spell that? Brigid?
Brigid. Brigid.
Okay.
After St. Bridget, I think, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. So it's access. It's getting them there. This goes back to my idea about for abortion airlines. I mean, I joked about this a long time ago, but I'm serious.
And there is a group of pilots who are flying women for abortions.
Mm-hmm.
They got together, the pilots got together, and they will fly. They work through the abortion funds and things like that, and they will fly women who need abortions to a place to get an abortion.
Now they're going to be prosecuting pilots.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, right, exactly. And so I was going to say something about this. Because if you want to speak moderately about abortion, okay, like if you want to be politically astute about abortion rather than ideological, from the perspective of pro-choice people, a law that permits abortions on a woman's request even in just the first trimester, 12 weeks, will take care of 90% of the abortions that are performed in the United States. And as long as it doesn't prohibit abortion after 12 weeks, those of us who are in favor of legal abortion can afford to fund 10% of the abortions in this country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's fascinating. All right. Well, we're going to do a little bonus and we're going to talk about, I do want to actually hear about what you do in Mexico and how that all works. So we're going to touch on that in the bonus. If anybody's interested, they can become a paying subscriber. And we're also going to talk about your age. You have a big birthday coming up. But Frances, thank you so much for coming back. This is incredibly valuable, and I love having you on. So I really appreciate
Well, I love
your visiting
talking,
me again.
so it's perfect. It's a match made in heaven.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks so much. That was my conversation with Frances Kissling. She is president of the Center for Health, Ethics, and Social Policy in Washington, D.C. And she's also a professor of philosophy and ethics in Mexico. Frances was president of Catholics for Choice from 1982 to 2007, and she's been working in the abortion rights movement since the very early 1970s. Again, to hear my conversation with her from last year, go back and find the May 8th, 2022 episode entitled The Future of Abortion. And again, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, where Frances talks about turning 80, among other things, become a paying subscriber at megandaum.substack.com. It's just $7 a month, and you get bonus content like every week. Like really good bonus content, I gotta say. What else do you need to know? This is the Unspeakable podcast. Please note that this is a separate entity from the Unspeakeasy, which is my free-thinking women's community. You've heard me talk about it a lot, but in case there's any confusion, it's not like if you are a paying subscriber to this podcast, you are automatically a member of the Unspeakeasy. Partly because we don't have any men in the Unspeakeasy. Anyway, our online community is fantastic. If you would like to join it, go to theunspeakeasy.com. The next retreat we have scheduled is in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, October 23rd through 26th. This is going to be a really luxurious retreat. So think about it. Treat yourself. Also, check out my other podcast, A Special Place in Hell, which I do every week with Sarah Hayter. I'm going to take off next week. I'm going to take this podcast off next week for the 4th of July holiday. That will give you time to catch up on all of this stuff. And I will be back after that with another super nuanced guest. Thanks for listening. See you then.